Welcome to Phoenix and Flame, pushing through and transforming even when you feel like a pile of ash.
This podcast is not intended for use as psychotherapy. If you feel you are in crisis, please call 911 or contact your local crisis hotline. Welcome to Phoenix and Flame. I'm Dana, and this is my podcast on pushing through and transforming even when you feel like a pile of ash. Well, I have had the privilege of being able to interview different individuals that have gone through traumas, and we get to hear their stories of transformation and triumph as they pull themselves up out of various examples of ash in their lives. Well, today is no exception. I have a wonderful guest with us, and his name is Dorsey Ross. Now, Dorsey was born January 16th, 1977, with a congenital disability known as Apert's syndrome. When Dorsey was born, his forehead was pushed outward, his nose and mouth were pushed inward, and his fingers and toes were fused, meaning he had no individual movement of them. Doctors gave Dorsey's parents no hope for his survival and advised them to put him into an institution. His parents both knew and trusted in God, and they believed that God would do great things in Dorsey's life. Throughout his life, Dorsey had to overcome many obstacles and trials, such as being bullied and called names like monster and freak, as well as undergoing multiple operations. Now, Dorsey, I could go on with all the information you provided in your biography, but I want to stop and really introduce you and let you kind of take over and share with us welcome to Phoenix and Flame, first of all.
Well, Dana, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
This is wonderful. Just what I've read so far, it sounds like you had quite the experience growing up. What was that like for you?
It was, it was difficult at times, especially with, you seeing the multiple operations that I've had to deal with. I had my first operation at 6 weeks to open the skull and to, allow my brain to grow and allow it to function normally. Because my parents were told, that I wouldn't survive and to put me into a institution and to let me be. And thankfully, because my parents were, people of faith and people that trusted God, they said, well, we can't do that. We can't put him into a institution. We'll just take him home and see what will happen. They had heard from one of the nurses in the hospital where I was born in Queens, New York. Grew up, most of my life in New York. I now live in Pennsylvania. And they had heard from one of the nurses in the hospital that doctors at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital were doing operations on babies like myself. And they took me there and they said, well, we can operate, we can, relieve the pressure on his brain and, we can see what happens, but he'll have to, overcome a lot. He'll have to go through a lot of difficulties and a lot of issues in his life. But, we really, basically, we really don't know how long he'll survive. Doctors at one point told my parents, we don't think he'll live past the age of 18. From about 6 weeks to about 5 years old, I had probably about 10 operations, I would say. Some lasting up to 10 hours at a time. Over my lifetime, up until about I was the age of probably 17 or 18, I had about 68 operations to, reconstruct my face and to separate my fingers. And, because I was, growing up, especially with the operation, that was, very painful to have to deal with and have to go through. but a lot of it was for my own benefit, was for my own health, and was to make me, look more. I don't want to say human, but more like a regular person.
Right.
The doctors, even told my parents that they would look at my dad and they would see, the shape of his head and what his eyes looked like and everything. So they would try to conform, what he looked like to what I looked like so that I can look more, as a boy and as a young man, I would look more like, to the best of their ability, look more like my dad growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in and out of the hospital multiple times. And like you said, you brought it up earlier, being teased and make fun of, being called monster and freak. I mean, it doesn't happen as often as it did when I was younger, but even as an adult, it still happens at times. People will stare, people will call, snicker and say things that they may not think I can hear, they may not think I can know what's really going on.
Mm-hmm.
It still happens at times, unfortunately.
Dorsey, you seem to have a really neat personality. And I'm kind of wondering, as you look back on your life, both childhood and coming up through adult years, how long generally does it take someone to get to know you, who you are on the inside, until they don't really see anything else? They don't see the things about your physical appearance that might make you somewhat different from them or whatever. How
Yeah,
long does it take them?
I mean, I've met people and I've known them for a few weeks, and that topic would come up, where I would say something and I would say something about my disability, and they were like, "Well, I don't see you with someone with a disability."
Mm-hmm.
It probably doesn't. I mean, I get maybe it depends on the person. I don't know. And for me, at least, I've gotten probably several comments of people where I would only know them, for a little while. They would tell me, "Well, I don't see you as someone with a disability, yet at least myself, I go home and I look in the mirror and I see someone with a disability." But
Well, but your personality is so amazing in that not only have you been through so much, but you also seem to be someone who's trying to and has accomplished a lot that you want to try to see how much you can do. Whereas I've run into some individuals along the way that they're constantly, or maybe not constantly, but close to it, trying to be a victim.
yeah,
They're trying to use things as an excuse to not do this and not do that. And they're always wanting to draw attention to anything that could make them not have to be responsible for
sure,
something. But you seem to be the inverse of that, that in spite of many things, and you could have stopped so many times along the way, and you keep going and you've accomplished. I mean, share with my listeners what I have not shared with them yet about all the things that you were able to do.
yeah. Well, I think the biggest reason that I don't, make myself out to be a victim, and I have been able to accomplish so much is because of my parents, and because my parents, again, going back to, the fact that people don't see me as someone with a disability is, I mean, obviously they knew I had a disability, they saw that I had a disability, but they didn't treat me as someone with a disability. They knew I had
Mm-hmm.
limitations. They knew there were certain restrictions that I wouldn't be able to do, but yet they didn't stop me from going out and trying something and doing what it was that I wanted to do. Several examples when I was younger, I was on, I would go out in the street and play baseball and play football and play basketball, and I can't lift my hands above my head, because that's very restrictive of me to play certain sports, for example, like basketball. just a few months ago in the summertime, the church that I attend, they have the young people there that go out in the backyard and play basketball, and I was in that group, playing basketball. So I'm not someone that said, well, put my hands up and say, well, I can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
And as I got older, I started to, I didn't do well in certain classes and certain, groups in school. I had a learning disability and whatnot. And I was also part of a baseball and bowling league for people with disabilities as well. And there were times I would fall and butt my head and break my arm a couple times here and there, and I would have to go to the hospital and get checked on just to make sure that everything was okay. Thankfully, none of I mean, they might do it now, but back then, for whatever reason, they never none of the doctors were like, "Hey, we got to call CPS, Child Protective Services on this family. This kid's getting, something's wrong with this kid over here. He's coming into the operating room or the hospital."
Dorsey, you seem to focus on what you can do as opposed to what you cannot do.
Right.
And I was wondering if you found that people would see you in the light of, like, if you see yourself as someone that you can do these things, you're going to be out on the basketball court, even though you might end up in the hospital when someone else might not. But you're out there, you're out there with people, and you see yourself as someone that it's like you can either focus on what you can do or what you cannot do. And from what you're sharing with me so far, you seem to be someone who focuses on what you can do. Do you feel like since you're doing that, that other people generally will see you in that light as well, or not?
I hope they do. I hope they do see that the things I can do overshadow, maybe the things that I can't do. And one of the sayings that I have, especially when I go for my sermons and my speeches that I give at churches and events, one of my statements in my life, I think I only started it a few years ago now, and it's probably even in my book that I wrote. But the saying is, "Can't is not in my vocabulary." I say that because it's a true statement. There's never, very rarely a time, that I say can't, or I'm not going to be able to do this or to do that in my life. Yes, I've had struggles, and yes, I've had difficulties or things that I wasn't able to do or things that I struggle with, but I was able to persevere and able to push through in those times, and I was able to come out on top. And one of the things was with my education and struggling with school and
Mhm.
struggling with learning and everything. And as I got older, as we all do, we start to dream and we start to think about what do we want to do after we graduate school or after we graduate high school. Some of the things for me was, as most boys do and some girls do, they want to be the big sports athlete and they want to be the big sports star. And other thing was maybe going to the Ghost Guard or be a lifeguard, or go back and be a nurse in the hospital, to help people in the hospital. I really enjoyed working with the youth and being part of the youth group when I was growing up in my church. That was a very safe space for me, because that was
Mhm.
a place where I knew they wouldn't tease me. I knew that they wouldn't make fun of me and they wouldn't bully me. And all. There were times, when I graduated high school, that had a party for me and they roasted me, about certain things, but it was all in good fun. And as I went to a meeting to decide or to discuss what I was going to do after I graduated high school, there was a meet. My mom was there, and again, my mom, my dad both, my mom passed away in 2002, but my parents were both big supporters of, whatever I wanted to do, try and do. And they asked me, well, I said I wanted to go on to college. And my high school history teacher was there, and he said, I don't think Dorsey will be able to make it in college. I don't think he has the ability or whatnot to be able to do it. They asked me, and I said, "Yeah, I think I can make it." At that point, I had no idea what I was getting myself into, and the comparison, that I put together sometimes is like going from a small fishbowl to going to a river or maybe even an ocean. Because I went to school all my life in the same school, so I
Hmm.
knew all the teachers. I knew, a lot of the students. I was very, closed in that schooling system where I didn't know anybody else. So going to a
Right.
school for a couple of hundred students and 50 teachers where I knew everybody to a community college of 2,000 and a
Right.
couple of hundred professors, and I didn't know anybody.
Whew. What was that transition like for you? Because that's daunting for anybody.
Yeah, it was difficult. I mean, I remember the first day coming out of school, of college, my dad was picking me up because I couldn't drive at that time. I went down, I had taken a class or something, and I had to do some type of test. And I was like, Dad, I had to take a test on the first day of class. I'm not gonna make it. But it was difficult, and I mean, the first couple of weeks, I was struggling. I even went to my mom one time, and I said to her, like, "Hey, I don't know if this is for me. I don't know if this is what I really should be doing." And she said to me, "Take it a few more weeks and see
Hmm.
what will happen." And there was
That's
a
good advice.
yeah, and there was a group, a Christian group that came to my church, and it was called Chi Alpha, and it's a Christian-based, faith-based group,
Okay.
Bible study group that meets on secular campuses. They, said, they were talking about it and whatnot. And the next day, I went to the bookstore, wherever it was that I went to look for the different clubs that they were having on Wednesday afternoons.
Right.
And sure enough, there was a Chi Alpha Christian Club on that campus. And I went to that meeting. And I'm not saying that, I didn't struggle at times yet, but from the time that I went to that meeting till 4 years later when I graduated, I was no longer physically sick at night when I would go home. Again, like I said, it wasn't that I didn't struggle. Obviously, it took me 4 years to do a 2 year community college, so I had to take several classes over again. There was some semesters where I was part time and only did 9 credits, so I wasn't, too overloaded, with classes.
But Dorsey, what I'm hearing as you're describing all of this is I'm hearing that you did not quit.
Absolutely.
That
Yeah.
there was any reason, there's any number of reasons why no one would have blamed you if you had said this is too overwhelming. I'm too full of anxiety. There's so many things I can't do. I see all these other people doing all these things, and I don't think I compare, whatever like that. But you didn't see yourself that way, and you did not quit.
Right. Yeah, and really, I'm not that person. I'm not a person that to quit. If eventually, I don't think I ever really quit at anything in my entire life. I mean, as I
Mm.
said earlier, I have, short arms. There were times when I would see the rock climbing walls that they have in different buildings and whatnot, and I would try those rock climbing walls. And even after going to 4 years of community college, I felt like I wanted to go on to Bible college because I felt like I wanted to become a youth minister because that's what I felt the calling of God was on my life. And, like you said a minute ago about quitting. In
Mm-hmm.
2002, August of 2002, I had fallen on the campus of the Bible College. It took me 3 days because I listened to a friend of mine. It took me 3 days to realize that I had broken my arm
Oh
while
my
I was on that
gosh.
campus. So I was walking and running around that campus with a broken arm, and I didn't even realize it.
Whoa. Oh my gosh, Dorsey.
My elbow, I'm not, I think it was a Monday morning. Monday morning, my elbow was probably double the size that it's normally supposed to be. So I said to a friend of mine, I don't, I looked at my elbow up. I was like, I don't think that's normal. And so they took me to the hospital. My mom and my dad came down, and at the same time, my mom had a little, I guess, a mini stroke or whatever that she had. And several months later, on December 7th, 2002, I was trying to reach my mom. Every day I would, try to call my mom and talk to her and speak to my dad. But he would answer the phone. I said, "Hey, Dad, how you doing? Good. Here's your mom. Here's mom."
Yeah, here's your mom. Yeah.
And so I was trying to get a hold of her that day, and I wasn't able to get a hold of her, and I didn't really know what was happening. Several hours later, I got a call from my sister that my mom had passed away, and it was in the middle of December. Finals were coming up for that semester, and I went home. We had the funeral and everything, and for whatever reason, I went back that same month, maybe a week later, whatever, and finished up that semester and did the finals. And maybe I talked to my dad or whatnot, but I continued on.
Wow.
It took me another 3 years to finish Bible college, but I finished Bible college 3 years later. So it took me between community college and Bible college. It took me 9 years to get two associate's degrees and one bachelor's degree.
Well, have you ever heard that phrase, it's not how you start, it's how you
Oh,
finish?
absolutely.
Uh-huh. And I mean, you finished and you're still going. Now, Dorsey, let me ask you a question because I've talked to lots of different guests and I'm a psychotherapist, and so I've talked to a lot of different patients and different people. I'm imagining that there might be someone out there listening that maybe is kind of questioning Christianity and the presence of a God. And if there is a God, a question that frequently would come up would be, how could he allow this to happen to me?
Yeah,
How could I believe in a God and trust a God that would allow such things to happen to me? That's a question that we hear a lot.
right.
And you are in a good position with everything that you've gone through since birth to answer that. I'm really curious and interested in what your answer is to that question.
To them, it may not they may not really understand it, but fortunately, from a Christian perspective, unfortunately, we live in a falling world. What I mean by that, going back to the Book of Genesis, where Adam and Eve are in the garden, and they're talking about eating from the tree of the fruit, and God says, don't eat from this tree. Eve takes the fruit and eats it, and sin, and that's how sin comes into this world. And
Hmm.
that's what people say. Christians would say, well, things happen in this world, bad things happen in this world because we live in a falling world. God's not a God that is going to punish you for a sin or for what you are going to do. So what I'm saying, I mean, God's not punishing me because I live in a fallen world. I believe that God created me the way that He did because He had a reason and a plan and purpose for it. Yes, it's a genetic defect of why I was born the way I was born. Now, then the question becomes, well, I mean, we all know from biology and whatnot that we're all created we're born and formed inside our mother's bodies. Now, I don't know if, I believe that God allowed me to be born this way, but I don't think he was up there saying, well, Dorsey's going to be born with this disability, so and so's going to be born with this disability, this one's going to have these problems in his or her life. If that makes any sense.
It makes a lot of sense. It's very helpful, especially coming from someone that has your background and has faced the things that you faced. You have a really powerful position to be able to express your thoughts on that because of everything that you've gone through.
Right.
I've heard other people talk about feeling that sometimes when they are on the other side of it, like, Phoenix and Flame is about pushing through and transforming even when you feel like a pile of ash, just allow the transformation to happen. And I've talked to people, and I'm one of these people that feel this way as well, that sometimes when we're on the other side of it, we're different than we were before because of things that we were allowed to go through. And that difference or those differences sometimes give us a window or a way to help someone else when we could not have had we not gone through that hard time.
Yeah, definitely. No, I think in the Bible, I think it's First Corinthians, or one of the New Testament chapters. It talks about. I'm probably going to get it out of order, but it talks about character creates hope, and it talks about these things that we deal with and that we're created with. Character, hope, perseverance, love, and how, like you're saying, with the things that we deal with, those things will build up within us when we're going through those trials, and when we come out of it, we're better off for it.
Stronger. It kind of reminds me of a question that you had listed. For those listeners out there, when we're on, Dorsey and I are both on Podmatch, and it's this awesome website, and you can list out questions that you're prepared to answer and that you want to talk about when you're a guest on someone's podcast. And Dorsey, one of your questions was, how did you overcome people making fun of you? It kind of reminds me of what you just said in terms of how going through that and experiencing that, you kind of come out strong on the other side. But do you have anything else you want to add about when you were a child and getting called names, very awful names from other people that weren't very kind? How did you overcome that? What helped you the most?
Realizing, as I said before, realizing that, God created me in his image, and that out of that I was a masterpiece in his image. And that in Psalms 139, again, it talks about being, created inside a mother's body.
That's awesome. Well, I'll tell you what, I know that my listeners have so benefited from hearing all of this. I mean, your story is amazing. Dorsey, I appreciate getting to know you and to be able to talk with you and hear what you've gone through. Now, before we wrap up, I want to make sure that I'm able to send my listeners, if they want to go and they will want to get more information about you, you said they could go to, you said www.dorseyrossministries.com. Do I have that
Yes,
right? Now, you also mentioned earlier when you were talking about a book that
right.
you had written.
Yes,
What is the name of your book?
it's called Overcomer, and
Overcomer.
it's my autobiography.
Awesome. Dorsey, thank you so much. I appreciate your time and your willingness to come and share your experience with my listeners. And I know that they have benefited from listening to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, guys, I'm telling you what, this has been an amazing time. And listening to Dorsey is just, it's just so encouraging and just lovely to hear everything that he's been able to overcome, and gives me, and I'm sure gives you, encouragement that if he can face what he faced and he can find a way to persevere, then maybe we can too. maybe we can go a little further. Maybe we can not quit. Maybe we can keep seeing ourselves maybe as we're designed by Christ, by God, and keep going and be able to transform. I would like for you to put the link of the podcast on your favorite social media platforms, whatever that is. If you're interested in more podcasts, you can go to phoenixandflame.com. I'm also in the process of creating an online boundaries course that will be available. And by the time I launch this particular podcast, it might be available. I'm not sure. But thank you for listening. Please share this podcast with other people if you have friends or coworkers, neighbors, anybody that you feel like would benefit from listening to Dorsey's story. Please send it, text it, send it an email, put it on your social media platforms, and encourage people to listen and to share so we can grow our Phoenix and Flame community. I hope the rest of your day is wonderful. This is Dana on Phoenix and Flame.